Well, I'm going to share with you this morning what I have always called my fairy tale. I first heard of Mary Baba in 1956. Right after Baba had been in the United States, I met two women in New York who had met Baba a few days before. One of them, her name was Ginny Sadowski, came to work for the newspaper where I was working. She did her work at home, and it was part of one of my weekly runs around my beat to stop at her house and pick up her work. So, of course, just having met Baba, she was full of it. And she would offer me a cup of coffee and start telling me about Baba. And she had a picture of Baba on the refrigerator door in the kitchen. And it's that picture of Baba. He's wearing a garland, and he's sort of three-quarter face, and the eyes are very vibrant. And I remember when I first saw the picture that I thought he had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. Well, when she started talking about Baba, she was real careful. She knew I was a Catholic, and this is in the 50s, and she didn't know what kind of reaction she was going to get. So she didn't tell me who he was. She sort of beat around the bush, and with these long explanations, like if you wanted to learn to be a master musician, you'd go to a master musician. I'm trying to relate this. So somewhere in there, her younger sister, Liz Sadowski, started showing up for these coffee clutches. And Liz did not have Ginny's patience. So one day she just popped out and said, "Well, he's the Christ. Take it or leave it." And I had a sneaking suspicion that's what they were leading up to, but when Liz said the words, I accepted it immediately. I mean, it hit me so deep inside, and I said, that's right, he is. And when I was a kid, I'd always been very resentful that the Catholic Church told me Christ came only once, and I thought that was a real jip. And how come I didn't live then? It just was not fair. So I was primed to accept the fact that he had come again. Well, for a while, along with that acceptance of that fact did not come a real strong desire to see Baba. I was content knowing that he was in the world. So along came 1958, and Baba was coming back to the United States. So Ginny and Liz asked if I wanted to come down to Myrtle Beach with them. Baba said, the people who were coming, only those who loved him and were willing to obey him should come. And this started this whole thing going on in my mind, and I realized I didn't know what love was. I didn't know if I loved anybody, let alone love Baba. And I knew how Baba felt about obedience. And I thought if I couldn't say I loved him, I shouldn't go. And on one level, that was the dumbest thing I ever did in my life. But he made up for it later. So I didn't go. But the last day that Baba was in Myrtle Beach and I was home in New York, in the middle of the night, and I'm not a person who remembers dreams, very seldom, I suddenly woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning, thought I was awake, and saw Baba standing at the foot of my bed, and it scared the daylights out of me. And he was wearing his blue coat, and he had one hand on the bedpost, and you see those pictures standing with one hand on his hip, and looking at me and with his head cocked and smiling. And the impression I had was that he was saying, well, are you coming or aren't you? And I was so terrified of this. I jumped out of bed and I heard my heels hit the floor, and I knew I was awake. I was so startled by the whole thing, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. My heart started pounding and everything. But the minute I realized that he was there and I was awake, then he was gone. And I climbed back into bed and went back to sleep. I was exhausted by those few seconds. A couple of days later, Ginny and Liz came back from Myrtle Beach, and I told them about this dream, or whatever it was. And Liz, who was in such a stupor from having been with Baba and wasn't up for doing anything much anyway, said, well, I'll go back down to Myrtle Beach with you if you want to go. Just go for a visit to be at the center. Baba had already left. So I said, okay. And she called Elizabeth Patterson and asked if she could bring me to the center. So we went. And it was at that time that Elizabeth had asked Baba who could stay at the center when he was not there. And Baba said, those who love and follow me, those who know of me and want to know more. And the one condition at that time was that if someone came who had not met Baba, either Kitty or Elizabeth had to stay on the center at night when that person was there, because the house that's there now was not there then. They lived in town. So when we arrived, it was Kitty who came out every night and stayed in the lake cabin while I was there. And there was nobody else on the center except Liz and me and Kitty and Frank Eaton. And I had Kitty to myself every evening, and didn't appreciate that probably until years later, how lucky I was. But at one point, I was sitting in the lagoon cabin one day, just sitting there in front of Baba's chair, and suddenly felt this wave of love come from Baba to me, go through me, go around and back to Baba and close up. And there was no question then of who loved and who was loved, but there was only this circle of love. It was all one thing. And it was at that moment I realized that I could say that I loved him, because he had given me the gift of his love, and that was what I gave back to him. And of course, at that point started my desire to see him. And I had such wonderful timing. He was back in India. He was in seclusion. We couldn't even write. And people were saying it's going to be a long time before he either comes again or we'll go there. So then started the wait. And it got so bad that I got terribly jealous of everybody who had met Baba. I used to get up and walk out of a room when they were talking about being with Baba because and actually I remember Beryl Williams not being sympathetic at all. She laughed like crazy. She thought it was great. Baba was drawing me. And she thought that was wonderful. But Beryl and Kitty were so kind. They could write to Baba at that time. They had permission to do that. And both of them would always put a little line in, either writing to him or to Monty or to Marin saying how much Ian wants to meet Baba. And every once in a while, Baba would send back a letter to them that said, Baba knows how much Ian wants to see me, and sending his love. And then that would keep me going for a little while longer. But Baba was not well in those years. And then when it came to 1960 and 1961, people started talking, maybe we won't see him again. But Kitty was always very positive about it. She said, we will. Well, in 1961, I was at a New York Monday night group meeting one night, and I was reading from the discourses, the part that says, when the disciple is ready, the master comes. And I thought, well, that takes care of you. You aren't, and he isn't. But I thought Baba, in the meantime, had given me so much love. The meeting would be the icing on the cake, but because I already had so much, I shouldn't expect it. And I gave it up. That night, I realized I am not going to meet him, but I am still so lucky. The very next Monday night, a family letter had arrived from Monty, and Fred Winterfeld came into the Monday night meeting carrying this letter, and Fred had this marvelous poker face. He never gave away anything. He should have been jumping up and down. But he stood up there, absolutely sober-faced, started to read this letter. And way over on page 3, It said, Baba has decided, because of the longing of his lovers, to open the door a crack in his seclusion, and his lovers may come for 1 hour on any one day over a 2-week period and then go right home. I was stunned. I mean, my immediate feeling was, this is my chance, this is my only chance. And that when we got the letter, it had never occurred to Monty, she said later, that anybody would come from the West. The time was too short. So when we got the letter, there were only 9 days left out of that 2-week period that he had set aside. I had never been out of the United States. I had no passport, and I didn't have a dime. So Liz was at that meeting with me. She was sitting next to me, and she told me later, Liz would have run over anybody to get to Baba, and she did. She had a hard time with her parents, and I mean hard. But she said she felt then, she had no feeling about going, but she thought that if she turned and looked at me, and I looked like I wanted to go, she was going to give me the money. So she said she turned and she looked, and obviously I wanted to go. But the strange part of that evening was that nobody else in that room, except Fred, had that feeling that get up and go. And I remember John Bass saying, well, this isn't for us, it's just for the Easterners. You know, so Liz turned and she asked me, and she said, if I give you the money, will you take it? It's a gift, and will you go? And I said, yes. Because I knew that there were no strings attached to it. It was a gift that she was giving me out of her love for me. And she checked it out with her sister. And between the two of them, they had enough money in the bank for one person to go. So actually what happened, they both gave up their chance to go so that I could. And Ginny said that there was no way that she felt that she could go on to India and leave me behind after all those years of telling me about Baba. So the next morning, this is Tuesday, I went into work and I thought, I'm going to have to quit my job in order to do this. And I was very gung-ho in my career. I was having a great time. It was just starting, and I was doing very well. But I thought, they don't let me go. I'm just going. So I walked up to my editor, who had a wild temper, and he had fired somebody the week before for going off to Florida on 24 hours notice. And I wasn't going to give him much more than that. You know, so I walked up to him and I said, Vic, I have the chance to go to India for the weekend. So he stood up, and I'm waiting for the blast. And he said, well, of course, you have to go. I said, well, in that case, I need somebody to work for me Thursday night and Friday. I'll be back here Monday. And I called Air India and asked them about flights on Tuesday morning, and they had a flight going to Bombay on Thursday night. It would get into Bombay on Saturday morning. I would somehow get to Pune, wherever that was. I didn't know. See Baba for the hour, which he had set every day from 4:30 to 5:30. Get back to Bombay, get the 1 a.m. flight back to New York. Be back in New York on Sunday and back at work on Monday. You know, so Vic sort of caught the spirit of it. He turned to one of the other editors. He said, Harry, Ann has to go to India for the weekend. And we're going to help her out. You know, we need to rearrange the schedule. And then I said, well, you know, I don't have a passport or anything, and I need a visa, so can I have some time now? Go take care of that. And I had never gotten a passport. I thought you walked in and you got it. You know, just like going into a store. So one of the photographers took pictures for me, and I went racing down to the county courthouse and went in and filled out the passport papers. Pictures were wrong. But the man said to me, he said, you go across the street, get new pictures. He said, it's getting late and I'm supposed to close, but I'll wait for you. So I went and I got the pictures and I came back, gave him everything, and I said, now how long is this going to take? And he said, 3 weeks. And I said, but I'm leaving for India Thursday night. He said, oh. So he put all the papers in an envelope and the pictures, and he wrote a woman's name on the envelope. He said, you go into Manhattan tomorrow to the Passport Bureau at Rockefeller Center and give these papers to this woman, to no one else. Tell her I sent you, and maybe she can help. So the next morning, Ginny, with her Saks charge card and all the cash she had on her, took me by the hand and we went into New York and we went to the Passport Bureau. Now this is the end of May. Tourist season is just starting and the place is jammed. But I found this woman sitting at her desk all alone, having a cup of coffee, and there's nobody in front of her. So I walked up and I gave her the papers and I didn't say anything. I let her look at them. And she said, all right, she said, come back in 2 hours, I'll have your passport. And I said, well, I have to then get a visa, so what time does the Indian consulate close? Oh, she said they close early, so you better come back here in an hour or you're not going to make it. So at that point, the two of us began to suspect nobody is going to say no. Anything. So we went over to Air India and to get the tickets. And what they had done, they had booked me out of the United States on Thursday, May 26, 1961, and back on May 28, 1962. Because the agent said, nobody goes to India for the weekend, right? And we finally got it straightened out. He understood what I wanted to do, and he said, lady, I went to London for tea once, and you make me look like a piker. Right? Well, we left there, and since this obviously looked like it was probably going to work, I asked the Air India man where I could send a cable because I thought, Baba had said in this family letter, he said, people should not come a great distance or at great expense for so short a time because he might give another opportunity in his own way. And I didn't believe a word of it. I'd been hearing this stuff for years, and nothing had happened. So he told us where the telegraph office was, and I went over there and I sent a cable trying to cover myself with this, and I said, no distance too great, which it isn't on jet. No price too high, and it wasn't my money. I'm coming, and I'll arrange my own transportation from Bombay. But what I thought was that if it wasn't right that I was coming, and that cable would give Baba time to stop me. They could get back to me, and even if I was en route, that Ginny and Liz would find a way to get in touch and say, Baba says, no, turn around and come home. So as I was standing there doing that, the Air India agent came running in the door, and he said it had occurred to him that I was going to India alone. I didn't really know anyone there. And if I would come back to his office, he'd fix things up to make sure that I got to Pune okay. So I told him I would come back a little bit later. I wanted to make sure about that passport and the visa. And we went back to the passport office. She had the passport right on time. And we went tearing over to the Indian consulate. And I thought this might be where I would have a little trouble because Fred and Ella had warned me not to say why I was going, and that I was going to Baba. So Baba was in seclusion. He wouldn't want any publicity. And there was already beginning to be some problems with young Americans going to India, running out of money and overstaying their visas. So to be careful about what I said. So we got over there, and I filled out the papers and handed them to the clerk and said, now how long is this going to take? And she said, 3 days. this is already Tuesday, and I said, but I'm leaving tomorrow night. And I had put on the application where it says, why are you going to India? I said, I am going to see an old friend of my family's who has been ill, and might be my last chance to see him. All of which was true. So she looked at all this, and she said, you come back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock and I'll have your visa. So then we went back to the Air India office, and the agent had arranged that someone would meet me in Bombay, put me on the train to Pune, make sure that I got there okay. All right, we went home. I packed. See, I'm packing for a 22-hour stay in India. And the next day, Thursday morning, we go running back in to pick up the visa, and they had it. And that night, Ginny and Liz took me out to what was then LaGuardia and put me on the plane. And the last I saw of them, they were out on the observation deck. It was pouring rain. And the two of them are hugging each other and jumping up and down in the rain. They were more excited than I was. I was just going. I was going with whatever was happening, and I had ceased to think. Well, I got into Bombay, and I walked down off that plane, and I was met by a customs officer and a young man from Air India. And they shooed me through customs, and the young man bought breakfast for me and gave me a quick lesson in Indian money, which was not on the decimal system then. And of course, I promptly forgot it. But he took me out to the Dada railroad station. We found the station master. And I sat in his office until the train came. He put me on the train and found someone who would tell me when we got to Pune and when to get off. So we pulled into Pune, and the only thing I had to do was to get to the Napier Hotel. Mani had telegraphed Air India, and they gave me the message that she had said as soon as I got to the Napier Hotel, I was to call Guru Prasad. So I got to the hotel, and I walked in and up to the desk, and didn't identify myself. I asked the manager for a telephone. And he picked up the phone, and he dialed, and he handed me the phone. And there was Erich on the other end of the line. And Erich said that Baba had said that I was to stay at the hotel and rest and eat and everything until 3:30, when one of them would come for me an hour before the daily darshan started. So it was Meherji who came and picked me up. And of course, as a result, I have always dearly loved Meherji. It's very close. So he drove me out to Guru Prasad. And when we got there, even if you have never seen it, you remember the pictures of it. There's a wide driveway that curved in front of the steps leading up to Guru Prasad. And then across a veranda and into that main hall. And I bent over to get out of the car, and when I stood up in front of the steps, the door was open, and there was Baba sitting at the back of that hall, 60, 75 feet from me. Now, in the years that I waited, I only wanted to see Baba's eyes. That's all I wanted, just once. So I was standing there, and I looked at him, and all of a sudden, all I could see were his eyes. Like, they got huge. They filled the room. They blotted out everything else. And I saw shafts of light coming from behind his eyes. And I thought, if he drops his eyes, if he closes them, I'll drown in that light. And it was back to normal. And I brushed Meherji aside, and I went running up the steps. And when I stepped through the door, I felt again that same wave of love that I had felt in Myrtle Beach in the lagoon cabin. Only so much stronger that I stopped in my tracks. Like I couldn't move. My legs froze. And Baba looked at me and he smiled and he put out his arms like this. Come on. And I went running into his arms and burst into tears. And in that moment of feeling those arms around me, I knew for the first time in my life that I was completely safe and completely loved, and that I would and completely accepted. And there would never be another being in the world from whom I would get such total acceptance, such total love. And I realized that all my life I had felt that I had never had a home, that I had lived out of a suitcase. I was the middle child in my family, and I did not feel loved. And I always thought I brought myself up. And in that moment, in Baba's arms, I realized he had brought me up. It had always been him who had taken care of me, and he always would. There's absolutely no doubt about it. That no matter what happened to me the rest of my life, I was safe and he would be there. Or when I stepped back from Baba, there were tears in his eyes. You know, I don't know what it meant, but he sat there and he looked at me, and I stood there and I looked at him, and he just nodded. You know. And then he said, "Do you have any questions?" No, Papa. I had already been there 5 minutes, and more than I thought I was ever going to get. And I thought, if there was anything that he wanted me to know, he would tell me, and there was no necessity for asking him any questions. And besides, I had known people who had asked Baba for advice, and he had given it, and they had not followed it. And there was the trouble, so I wasn't going to risk it. And I just felt it wasn't necessary anyway. If he knew everything there was to know about me, if I needed to know anything, he'd tell me in his own good time. So then he started calling the mandali. The women mandali had been in Mara's room, which had a louvered door in it, so they watched my meeting with Baba. And he called them all out to meet me. And I hadn't even noticed who else was in the room when I went in to meet him, but Erich was there, acting as an interpreter, and Goher was standing behind Baba's chair. I didn't see them, until later. Baba didn't ask me how I got there. He simply said, "Did you read the family letter?" And I thought, he's going to throw me out of here. I shouldn't have come. And I didn't care. I had more than I thought I'd ever get. And I said, "Yes, Baba, I did read it." He said, "What did it say?" And I said, "Well, you said people shouldn't come a great distance or at great expense because you might give another opportunity." And he said, "You came anyway?" And I said, "Yes, Baba." He said, "It's all right. I'm glad you came in spite of the letter." So then he said, "Now what are you going to do when you leave here?" I didn't quite understand the question. I said, "Well, I'm going back to work, I guess." No, and he said, "No, I mean this afternoon." And I said, "Well, Baba, I had intended to rush back to Bombay tonight and get a flight back to New York, but Air India has informed me there is no flight, and there isn't another one for 5 days. So I guess I'll just sit in the hotel and wait." And he said, "Well, now, no sightseeing." I said, "No, Baba, I know that." And he said, "Well, you will not sit in the hotel for 5 days. You will come here and sit with me every day for 5 days until the plane goes." And then he said, "Now, what will your office think?" And I said, "Well, Baba, they couldn't understand why I was coming for so short a time, and they did tell me if I wanted to stay longer, just to cable them." So he said, "Now you make sure you do that." They thought I was eloping with a Maharaja or something. I never told them. So I have lost a lot of what happened in that initial hour, really, I think it was mostly what Baba usually asks people come, did you sleep well? Are you eating well? Do you feel all right? Mostly that stuff. But my brain had gone into neutral, and all I could do was sit there and look at him. When 4:30 finally came, I at that point was sitting at Baba's feet, and he said, now, you come closer to my feet or you'll get crushed in this rush. Now they opened the doors, and there was this mob came tearing through those doors, and on either side of the door there were windows that were about this high off the floor. There were people diving through the windows. And I saw this one Indian woman bearing down on me over my shoulder, and she got to me and she planted her hand on top of my head, used me for a pivot, swung over me so she could get around behind Bob and sit behind his chair on the floor. And there were kids that got lost in the mob, and they were being passed overhead back to their parents. And Baba loved it. He sat there and he slapped his knee and just enjoyed it immensely, And in later years, when I heard people talking about decorum at Baba meetings, the thing, I thought of that. When everybody got sort of settled down then, and it was a very informal, low-key thing. Bob had said he wasn't going to give any discourses, didn't want any speeches. It was just to be there in his company for that brief time, and that he was not coming out of seclusion, he was inviting us in. So, when we were sitting there, a couple of times he asked me if I knew why St. Francis loved Jesus more than Peter had. I said, no, Mama. And he said it was because Francis never met Jesus, and therefore his love and his longing was that much stronger. Well, you know how that made me feel. I'd waited 5 years and been jealous of all these people, right? What a sweet thing to say. And then there were people there who were singing, and they were putting on skits and all this stuff. And there was a young woman there from Bombay who was going to sing for Baba a song about Mira. And he asked me if I knew who Mira was. And I didn't. And this was, Baba frequently talked about Mira to people and telling different parts of his story. But this was the only serious time in the 5 days that I was there that he looked at me and he said, Mira was a princess. She gave up everything. She gave up a throne, her whole life, all her money, to spend her life wandering, telling people about her Lord Krishna. And he said, she never put anyone or anything between herself and Krishna. And he leaned over and he looked at me again and he said, she never put anyone or anything between herself and Krishna. And I got the point. It's like, I am your Krishna. Be careful about this. Well, then he asked me if I'd read any of his books. And I said, well, yes, Baba. I'd read Avatar and God to Man and Man to God, and somebody had finally found me a set of the original discourses. And then he said, have you read God Speaks? And I had to be honest about it, and I said, well, I tried, Baba, and I got to page 64, and I didn't understand a word, and he laughed. He said, never mind, it's not important, don't bother. Well, the back of in the conclusion of that book, it says it was written to satisfy the convulsions of man's mind. Mine wasn't working, let alone being convulsions. And it was like he let me off the hook. I could not get to that book, and I have never been able to. That afternoon went on, that hour of Baba's. went on for something like 6 hours. I think it was 10 o'clock at night, before everybody left. And when I went back to the hotel, I was so, being with Bob, that vitality of his was so draining. I went back to the hotel, fell into bed with no dinner, and didn't wake up until late the next morning to hear somebody calling my name from downstairs. And there was Fred Winterfeld. I knew Fred was coming, but because he had, it was a naturalized citizen, there was some small problem with his passport and getting the visa, so he couldn't come when I did. And he had said to me, he said, it's too bad we can't go together. And I said, Fred, I'm not waiting for anybody, this one's mine. And I'm going, But when he came, we grabbed each other on the balcony of the hotel and we're dancing around there. And he was so happy for me, that I had met Baba. Well, he went to see Baba alone that afternoon. Baba had not asked me how I got to India, but he asked Fred. And he said, Fred, how did Ian get here? So Fred told him the whole story about the girls, Ginny and Liz, giving up their chance and giving me the money. And Fred told me later that Baba had tears in his eyes. And he said, Baba is touched by such love for Baba and for a friend. And then he told Fred, he said, Fred, I love Ian very much. So, any of you who knew Fred, he comes back to the hotel, got there, and he planted his feet and he says, Baba says he loves you very much. You can imagine what that did to me. The urge to turn cartwheels. But that afternoon, when there was again the hour darshan, and Fred and I went in a few minutes early to see Baba, Baba said to me, Fred told me how you got here. And he said, all helped you then? And I said, yes, Baba. And he said, all helped you because I helped you. I wanted you to come. It's obvious by this time. But then he said that he had sent a cable to Ginny and Liz. And he had Erich give me a copy of it. And what it said was, Baba says, because you have helped me come to Baba, you have made Baba come closer to you. Baba sends his love to you both. And he signed my name to it. And he said, do you think they'll like it? The thing was that I had tried that morning to word a cable to them, and it was beyond me. I didn't have the words for it, so Baba did it for me. Right. Well, that afternoon there were even more people jammed in there, and by that time there were two of us sitting. Baba had had chairs brought. When I was sitting on the floor, he saw I was obviously uncomfortable, and he said, you're not born to this, we are. There's no reason for you to be uncomfortable. And he had chairs brought and put against the sidewall, and had Ron O'Galey come out and sit with Fred and me to translate gestures, or if Erich was using Telugu or Marathi or Gujarati at the time, that she would translate Baba's gestures. So we were sitting against the wall, and I know Liz at one time had told me, the only important thing to remember when you are with Baba is you never ever take your eyes off him. Don't be distracted by anyone else, because that's the moment he'll turn and look at you and you'll miss it. And it had happened to her. So I'm sitting there looking at Baba's profile, like just sitting there staring at him. And every once in a while, he's so quick, he would whip around and look at me. Are you happy? Like over and over. Are you happy? Are you happy? I was ecstatic. Rano would give me the elbow and the ribs. Answer him. Answer him. So then, of course, on the second day, Fred and I were sitting there against the wall. And in the middle of this darshan, I heard Arnavas Dada Chanji from the back of the room say, Harry! And there was Harry Kenmore, who had come unannounced and had simply gotten in the darshan line. and was proceeding through the hall up to Baba when none of us spotted him. And Baba said, "Harry, what are you doing here?" And Harry said, "I've come to see my dear Pop." And Baba said, "Well, your Pop is very happy to see his dear son." You know. And then there were 3 of us sitting against the wall. And at this point, the Indians were becoming very curious about these Westerners sitting there. So Baba decided to introduce us. You know, and he said, "This is Harry Kenmore from New York, Fred Winnefalt from New York, and Ann Tonham from the United States." Although I was from New York too. And then he said, "She is a blessed woman. Otherwise, why would she have come when she had never seen me? Her love brought her, and that love is my gift to her." And it's like Baba confirmed what I had felt in the lagoon cabin years before, that any love I had was his gift. And the whole week was like that. Baba confirming these little things for me. You know, that I spent that week just staring at him, and I was so totally focused on him that at one point I got into a very heavy fight with Harry Kenmore in the dining room of this Napier Hotel, because Harry was yelling at me for getting up early and not calling him for breakfast. Right? So we had this fight with poor Fred sitting on, looking on, being very embarrassed. Later in the day, when we all went to Baba, we got out of Mayorji's car in such a position that Harry, who was blind, reached for somebody's arm and he got mine. So that we walked into Baba together. And Baba looked at Harry, who couldn't see this, and he looked at me and he laughed. You know, we'd had this knockdown, drag-out fight. Then come to Baba arm in arm. In the mornings, once Fred and Harry had gotten there, you know that Baba, wherever he was, would meet with the men mandali. There was a mandali hall, and there was one in Guru Prasad. And any male guests who had come. And when they were out there, he had Anavas take me around Pune to meet Erich's family and other Baba lovers who were living there or who were visiting. But when that last day came, Baba sent word that I was to come to Guru Prasad with Fred and Harry. When we got out there, Arnavas told me that Baba said I was to come into Mandali Hall with Fred and Harry for 5 minutes. So I came in and Baba said, "Now, there are no women allowed at these meetings. You're not supposed to be here, but you can stay for 5 minutes. And then you go to Maranmani." So I sat down, and Harry started telling jokes to Baba. And Baba stopped and he said, "Harry, do you think you ought to tell that joke Ann is here?" Right? It's one of Harry's innocuous jokes. Right, and Harry said, "It's all right, Baba, she's over 25. She's not this joke." So a few minutes went by, and Baba turned to me and he said, "Now you really have to go. You're not supposed to be here. There are no women allowed in here." So I got up and I started out the door. "You come back for another 5 minutes." So I came back and I sat down for another 5 minutes. A little while later, he said, "Now you really have to go." So I start out. He stopped me again. And there's this real twinkle in his eye. And he said, "When I come back in 700 years, you make sure that you come back as a man so you can attend these exclusive meetings." Right? Well, he's laughing, and everybody in the room is laughing, and I laughed. And I got outside the door, and it suddenly occurs to me, I don't know how Baba works. I don't know whether he's kidding or not, you know. Well, later in the day, I found Francis Brabazon, and I said, "Francis, was Baba joking? And if he wasn't, how do I make sure about this?" also often will tell you something in a light manner. He said, what he's done is make you a promise. He said, all you have to do is remember that. So I do remember it. Well, then I went to Mara's room, and all the women were there. There must have been 20 women there. And Mara told me that they had a sari they wanted me to try on. And I was much thinner then. So they all got involved in this. It was a beautiful, pale lavender sari with little gold flecks on it. And they all got involved in dressing me up in this sari. And Go Hair kept saying to me, put your hands together and say, Namaste, Baba. She made me repeat it over and over and over again. I didn't know what was going on. But we got the sari on, and all of a sudden we're all leaving Mara's room. We're trooping across that main hall. Go Hair opens another door, gives me a shove in the back, and slams the door behind me, and I'm back in Mandalay Hall with Baba, Men Mandalay, Fred, Harry, and 75 guys who have just arrived from Hamilpur. And it was the first time I'd ever worn a sari, and the only thing I was thinking about is it's not going to stay on. But I looked at Baba, I remember what Gaur said, and I said, Namaste, Baba. And he went, it's beautiful. He called me over, gave me an embrace, and he said, now you go back to Mara. Yeah. Well, the thing was, what nobody else knew was that by that time I was so head over heels in love that I had a natural human reaction, this being the last day, I wanted very much to get dressed up for Baba. But I had come to India with one change of clothes, not planning to be there, and I had nothing to get dressed up in. So he provided it. And when I got back to Mira, she said that the sari was hers, and that Baba had said that she could give it to me as a gift from her and from Baba. You see? Like, he's the avatar and the perfect master, and also the absolute perfect host. And every dumb little human whim that week, he responded to for me. And and then of course after that I felt I wanted to give something to Mara, but one of the stipulations of that darshan was no one was to bring gifts for the mandalay, so I wouldn't even ask. But that night, Go Hair came to my room at the hotel, and she said, Baba would like you to get some things from Mara in the West. And I said, I'd be glad to do it. And I said, how do you think Baba would feel if I paid for it? And she smiled, that wonderful smile, and she said, Baba said you wouldn't take the money. Well, when the last day finally came, it coincided with the end of that darshan. And all of us, Baba he wanted us all to go back on the same flight, so there was a lot of flight changing. We'd all come on different airlines, but he said, you must go back on the same flight. On the last morning, Baba sent word to anybody, even though they'd had their hour, if they were still in Pune, they must come that afternoon for darshan. And of course, there were thousands of them who had stayed in Pune on the chance that that's exactly what he'd do. Invite them back again. So that afternoon when we went out, there were, I believe the estimate was 5,000 people waiting to have darshan and to receive prasad. And Baba said that people would come up, get their prasad one at a time, and to leave immediately. So when I went up to get it, I did that. I took it from his hand and turned around, started to walk out the door, and I get this hand on the back of my neck, and it's Rano, and she said, "You didn't mean you dummy, go back and sit down." Rano and I became very close, and I suspect that, that's why I ended up working on her book. I mean, I loved her dearly. She was wonderful. She was a grounding influence. I mean, I was so spaced out that time, and she kept me from walking off the edge. That afternoon went on and on and on. Again, a very late night thing. At the last minute arrived Irwin and Edward Luck. Right on 4:30 almost. And it was Edward's first meeting with Baba. And he let them, for that time, sit at his feet. He didn't want anybody to bow down to him then, and hold a pillow over his feet so that no one would. And I have great memories of Edward looking up at Baba's face that entire time, just with, such awe. It was lovely. A lovely thing to see. And Irwin turned to Baba and asked him for God realization. And Baba said, "We won't talk about that now. Listen to the music." So by that time, there were 5 of us to go back to the United States together, all in the same plane. And Baba said that we could come the next morning to say goodbye to him. When we went out, I was full. I mean, it was time to go home. I had as much as I could take. But when I went up to Baba, I was crying, and I didn't want to leave. And when he embraced me, there was a look of anguish on Baba's face. I didn't understand it. I had a vague idea I had caused it. I did not understand it. And the goodbye was so fast. Like, I had that embrace, and then Rana was there. It was always her job to clear people out. And we were out and gone. I remembered that thing in the back of my mind. I didn't really dwell on it. But 18 months later, I was fortunate enough to go back to the East-West Gathering. That was the other opportunity he'd been talking about in the family letter, And I did go, and Liz went. And the moment that Baba spotted Liz, he pointed to her and he called her. And he accepted her gift to me as a gift to him. So he wiped out, if there were ever to be any sense of obligation, ever, it was gone, because he said the gift that she had given was to him, not to me. The East-West Gathering was a totally different time. I mean, I had been spoiled rotten that first year. I had all this attention, as Margaret Crass calls it, the courtship. The East-West Gathering, there were thousands of people there. Nobody was getting that kind of attention. And I got a little huffy about it. I was spoiled. And I remember one day, standing in the aisle in front of the dais where Baba was saying, I would have been standing there. He was sitting up here. And I thought, I'm going to stand here and stare at him until he looks at me. And he finally did, but the expression said, "All right, I have looked at you, now will you sit down?" But it was like, all of us, I think years later, we found out from each other, we weren't into talking to each other. There was no big sharing thing. It was every man for himself at the time. That we had all experienced in one way or another during that East-West Gathering that Baba was slowly withdrawing. And Francis Bravazan described it as the father saying to the children, "Now I have work to do and you must wait." And then there is the gentle closing of the door. And that sort of, I think, very beautifully sums up what individually we felt. And Baba did tell Margaret Krask and her dancers that they would never see him again. And Margaret felt that he meant it this time. But there were so many people in, and I was not big on crowds anyway, and I had had that wonderful gift of meeting Baba alone. But when the last day arrived, we were all going to get to say goodbye to Baba individually again. So my mind turned around. What I was thinking of, oh boy, I'm going to get another embrace. And I wasn't thinking about it being goodbye. So that when I went up to Baba, I was smiling and happy, and I leaned over and I kissed him on both cheeks, and I said, "Thank you, Baba, thank you." And when I pulled back from him, it was like he was on fire. He was beaming from ear to ear, and he reached up out of his chair like this and went, you know, and I remember the year before and the way I had left, and he was saying, that's the way I want you to be. As happy leaving as you were when you came. You take me with you. There is no separation. And I also felt that I said thank you, and that pleased him, and he let me know it. And if I never did anything else in my life, just once, I was so grateful for that little thing, how little he asked, had pleased him, and he let me know it. It is my most precious, vivid memory of him. It would be worth anything in my life to see it again. I had 2 days before I went back to work. I did sort of go into hiding for 2 days. But when I walked in the front door of the office, the telephone switchboard operator stood up and leaned over the front desk, looking at my left hand for a ring. She said, you look like you're in love. But it was fine. It was like, there was no problem with it. I went right back in to that work. I didn't miss a step. You know, within 2 days I was back in it, and it was, I mean, thank heavens that Baba made it easy for me. And when we got home, Harry had told me, you must cable Baba. And I didn't know what to do because the basic order was don't write. So I hesitated. I wasn't going to take Harry's word for it. And 2 days later, Ella Winterfeld called me, and she said, I have a cable for you from Baba. And what it said was, hope you reached home safe, happy in my love. Do not cable reply, but when you write directly to Marin Mani. Yeah. So you answered that question too. But it was a very easy slipping back into the stream. Yes.
And we've heard the story of Baba's nephew, one of them dressing up as you. When did you find out about that?
That happened, from what I can piece together, the morning I probably arrived in Pune at noon, and it had happened that morning. I knew when I got there that something had happened, something funny. Because Francis Brabazon introduced me to Nariman Dadachanji, and Nariman blushed from the neck up. I know, what is it? And Francis laughed, and he said, he met you this morning. You know, and I just heard a little bit of it, but I never heard the whole story until 10 years later. You know. And I've heard 12 different versions of it, and they're all wonderful. It wasn't their intention actually to impersonate me. It was just, that was coincidental. They happened to dress up, one of them wanted to dress up as a woman, and the timing was such that the assumption on the part of the people at Guru Prasad was that it was me. Harold, did you?
What happened when you got back to work? Did you have to explain to your editor what you had done?
No, I never told them anything. I mean, they were enjoying that sort of romantic love story. I let them enjoy it. You know, they kept looking for somebody to show up. You know, and in fact, I think they weren't quite sure I was going to come back. But for a bunch of very inquisitive newspaper reporters, and they were very aggressive. They were very polite with me. They did not ask. You know, they didn't pry into it. They're polite with their own something. Only one of them ever knew about Baba later on. Cindy?
What happened to Ginny and Liz? Do you still see them?
Oh, yes. Not that often, but we keep in touch by phone, and they do occasionally come to the center.
After meeting Baba, how do you live with the separation of Maxine?
You know, it's funny. After the first meeting, I felt a terrible separation. I mean, he was in India. And I was in the United States. And I had a hard time coping with that. But on January 31st, 1969, when Fred and Ella called, I was at Liz's house, and they called to tell us that Baba had dropped his body. My first reaction was, well, I'll be darned, he did it. And the second reaction was, well, now he's free and he's with me. And I think I'd always felt that Baba, that body, which was so beautiful, which I loved, was an overcoat that confined him. He did not belong in it. He should be free and out of it. And that when that happened, that was my first basic reaction. Of course, I missed him later. I still miss him. But my first probably true reaction was, now he's out of the cage. You know, and he's free, and he's always with me. I don't have to feel the separation. But on another level, of course I miss him. You know. Anybody would. I remember Goher in 1971 was the first time I went back to India after 1962. And I remember sitting on the floor in her old dispensary. And she was in tears, and she said, you know, people say that Baba will come back in 700 years. She said, but he'll be different. I want him now, and I want him the way he was. She said, never mind the 700 years. Yes?
How did the word translate? The one that Mary told you to say to Baba when you're in the Baba.
Go ahead. It's the God in me greets the God in you. Is that right, Nashwan, or basically?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
What was the joke that you had to be 25 to hear?
Do you know, I don't even remember it, but I have vague memories. It was a chicken joke, and it was one that Harry told repeatedly. But I'm no good at remembering jokes.
Baba like jokes?
Oh, yes. Yes. Baba had a wonderful sense of humor. You know, and I great appreciation for people like Margaret Krask who have preserved it to remind people. He did have a sense of humor. And he loved to laugh. And that was the wonderful thing about those 15-year-old twins, his twin nephews, that they had this remarkable ability to make Baba laugh. What a gift. You know, to be able to make the avatar laugh. Yes, Linda.
Did you find that your life was really accelerated after the first meeting?
Nothing happened for 10 years. It blew up 10 years later. And accelerated, it certainly did. And it all came apart. And at that point, all I had left was Baba. Everything else had fallen away. I felt like I was standing in a vacuum with nothing under my feet, and he was the rock. He was the only thing that hadn't moved. But I had a sort of a very easy honeymoon stage for 10 years, you know, before anything really changed. I went on with my life. Slow bloomer. Yes, Esther.
Did you notice any change in the feeling of Baba's presence before and after he dropped his body? Because people say he's more accessible since then.
I didn't feel his presence at all while he was in the body. I felt the separation. And I'm not one of those people who feel Baba's presence a lot. Like I know he's there, but I don't always feel it. But I felt it more after he dropped his body at various times. Yeah.
What did you advise with the women when you came back to the States?
I'll tell you later. Ask me afterwards. Anybody? Thank you. Jai Baba.